into positions of hopelessness and helplessness. The government gives them the drugs, builds bigger prisons, passes a 3-strike law, and then wants us to sing God Bless America. No, 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 not God Bless America. God damn America. That's in the Bible for killing innocent people. God damn America for treating us citizens as less than human. God damn America as long as she tries to act like she is God and she is supreme.
Okay, what's up? Hello, everyone. Welcome to PDA. It is the week of June 11th. That's not how I start the show, ever. I don't know. What are we talking about? D.C. today, huh? The most important election of our lifetimes. The mayor of D.C. and other elections. It's the capital of the country, so whoever's the mayor of Washington, D.C. is the president. We all know this from taking high school civics and history.
The mayor of America. That's how it should work.
Yeah, I might as well. None of this just doesn't make any damn sense anyway.
Yeah, I'm sure there's like some loophole in there where that could be the case if you wanted it to be.
That'd be cool. Man, DC's a crazy place. I was there when I was on tour. When we played Comet Ping Pong Pizza and saw the adrenochrome machines and everything. And I gotta say, man, the city's got a weird vibe. Everyone who you know from Twitter is just there, walking around. It's pretty weird.
Yeah, you saw, we talked about this, right? You saw Charlotte Clymer there. She was not lurking, but she had an adjacent birthday to my birthday last year in Malcolm X Park. There's Matt Iglesias. Yeah.
Well, I did stand up there one time, and the guy, Matthew Lesko, I could get you money from the government guy with all the question marks or dollar signs or whatever the fuck.
They're question marks.
Yeah, he looks like the Riddler. It's confusing.
Yeah, it's like a yellow Riddler. It's like an ANCAP Riddler, basically.
Yeah, it is because they're yellow. That makes sense. Yeah, he was just there. And I was like, this is the oddest, for random person from the universe to be here. But that's my experience at DC, I guess. It's a place where people I know from TV and stuff are just walking around, but not like in an LA way where you're like, oh, you were on Scrubs. It's more like, oh, you yell at me at 3 a.m. when TV is over.
Right. You're on the McLaughlin group. Oh my God. Get this guy a VIP booth.
Yeah.
Basically like that. Yeah, I never saw Lesko in the flesh. I did see his car just parked at random spots, and you know it's his car because it's like bright yellow and has black question marks all over it.
Oh, you know, yeah. Why question marks? He's not the Riddler. He gives you money.
I don't know.
It should be dollar signs.
I think it's, question what you're doing with your lives, I guess. Question the system. In a way, he's kind of helping Washingtonians. That sounds cooler. People from Washington as a collective should be described as Washingtonians.
Yeah. Coming soon to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Washingtonians. Played by The Rock. I don't know. How you doing, man?
Pretty good. This episode, it makes me miss DC. I was so excited to vote in the Democratic primary because there's a lot of races all on one ballot, and the primary decides everything. Like in most, really, not just blue cities, but most cities, because most cities are blue in America, I feel like. And the local level is, I think, very interesting because it exposes the limits of liberalism very well. I think it really crystallizes it. I was thinking about this earlier because in Ari Robin Haaf's book about the Bernie campaign, which I read, we did a bonus up about it, but he dug up a quote from Bernie as mayor of Burlington, and he was saying to someone who's like, well, have you really been like a socialist mayor? Like you're not, forming a worker state government and like overthrowing the capitalist class, and heads are not rolling here. This is a nice town. There's some little more investment. And he says, yeah, I think a lot of people are going to look at Burlington and see like we have better parks and schools and things just run a little better. And they'll say that's not socialism. And they're not wrong. But he made a really interesting point, which is that the stuff he was doing in Burlington, a lot of people who are like very good liberals are just not going to do. Things like, create, instead of like a private resort area, he made it so it was just like kind of a public park, like a big complex in Burlington that like anybody can go to, and it's it's funded by tax dollars and it's for the public. So yeah, I think the local level, I love mayoral elections and city council elections. It's my hobby, is to smoke a fat J and watch a mayoral debate on C-SPAN. But
it's cool, man.
Yeah, they're spicing up. It's funny. Something I've noticed is that like they can be incredibly boring. Obviously, local issues can be very mundane, but the closer they get to the election date, it goes from like 0 to 60 in terms of the sparks that fly. Yeah, the recent DC mayoral debate was very feisty.
Bowser versus two whites. The craziest. It's not what it sounds like. It's I don't know what that sounds like. It's insane that there are two black men named White running against a woman named Bowser.
Yeah.
Like, it sounds like a guy walks into a bar joke or something.
No, yeah, I was like very shocked in DC because I moved just a couple months ago back here to New York, and I was doing stand up there, and nobody else took on that premise. I was the only one. Yeah, I mean, maybe since I left, everybody's doing the white mayor jokes, but yeah, and I won't get to do them anymore after the 21st, unless he wins, which. Yeah, we'll anti-jinx him.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, but I guess I'll tell my joke that I'll probably never get to do again.
Here's how you know your intuition is telling you whether or not this candidate is going to win. Do you feel like you're going to be able to do jokes about him for a while? Probably not, right?
Probably not. Yeah.
Get him out.
I hope we do. I hope it quickly becomes hack to talk about how DC, DC got a mayor who's white. Yeah, Robert White. Basically my joke. And then I also said, I'd help him out, but I don't think he needs me going around being like, vote white. Someone had to do it. Arguably, it's subpar material, but somebody had to tackle the mayoral name issue.
Here's what my joke would be. Wow, there's a mayor's race, and the incumbent is named Bowser. Who's running against this lady? Mario? Folks. Yeah, the worst joke of all time. That's what I would do.
I would now I'm regretting just not doing an entire hour that's just about the last names of the mayors of DC.
They're all pretty crazy.
Yeah. I mean, the first one was literally named Washington. And he was appointed. I don't know if he was the first one, but I think he was the last non-elected mayor.
Okay.
For the last appointed mayor, and his name is Walter Washington. And they're just like, you got the name, buddy. It's between you and Benny DC. So
yeah, DC or DC Benny.
DC Benny, yeah. That's what my brain was.
The comedian
was spitting out. Comedian, yes. There is actually a comedian running for mayor, Rodney Red Grant. Who I believe is an independent. So maybe you'll get an opportunity to vote for him. It does look like he worked as a police officer for a while. So that might be, comedian is enough of a non-starter for me. But I think police officer is definitely another one. But
which one's a redder flag,
Yeah.
I'm not really sure. Are those comics that are like, I used to be a cop and here's a bunch of jokes about it? Not good.
Yeah, it makes it really awkward. I'm scared of them.
Yeah, it's weird. Like, I don't want to laugh at you or give a gun. I don't think we should fund cops or comedians, either of them. And I'll vote for anyone who promises to defund really either one, but hopefully both.
Yeah, I'm for some carve-outs on the comedian question on that. But speaking of ex-cops...
we work best when we're scrappy.
Yeah. Speaking of former police officers, we're going to touch on this a tiny bit, but I wanted to highlight Ward 1 in D.C., my old neighborhood. Brianne, her name is, not Brianna. Brianne Nadeau is the incumbent council member, and she is being primaried by a self-proclaimed progressive. He's just as progressive as her on all the issues. Sala Sapari is, I think, his actual name. Speaking of funny names, Sala Sapari. I think that's how it's pronounced. Czapary. It could be Cuzza Party. But he is a former police officer who spent, 2020 probably beating up protesters, or at least enabling that, and is now backed by Republicans and challenging the incumbent Brandon Doe, who's, a decent progressive. She's pretty good on housing. And he's trying to take her out, and is being backed by Republicans. And there's a video circulated recently of his campaign manager's husband going around straight up taking down signs pointing out his Republican connections, which is illegal. Like, the law and order candidate just has people breaking the law. And wouldn't you know, this particular crime has gone unenforced or unregistered. People have complained to the Metropolitan Police Department, but again, this guy's a former cop, so they're literally just not doing anything about it. They're like letting this campaign go around and illegally take down signs.
Well, I don't believe it. Our boys in blue would never do hypocrisy. Right. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really depressing. Sounds about white, though. You know what I'm saying?
There we go. Boom.
Running against Bowser.
I do think she's going to pull it out, though. I think Nadeau will do okay. The other race, just wanted to tell a little fun anecdote about, is Ward 5, where there is a DSA endorsed candidates, State Board of Education member Zachary Parker, who's running in Ward 5 to take over for an incumbent, and crowded field. And Zachary Parker decided recently, after announcing his candidacy, to come out as gay. He is a gay man, which is great. People were supportive of that. But then, for some reason, one of his opponents, Vincent Orange, who I don't know what this is. There's a ton of politicians in DC named Brown, with the last name Brown, and then this guy Orange, and then White. I don't know what it is about all these. One of them last names
did it in the ballroom with the candlestick.
Yeah, which one of you overturned the will of the voters who wanted to raise the minimum wage for tip workers? They have plausible deniability. They have to do a whole game of Clue to figure out which council members voted to fucking sock it to the voters. Oh, which is another thing.
Clearly, it was Representative Mustard. Yes, as we'll get into, there is an initiative to raise the tip minimum wage. So people who are tip workers, servers, bartenders, etc. The voters of DC voted a couple of years ago to say, hey, these people should be making the regular minimum wage, right? You shouldn't be able to pay a tip worker an actual check of $3 an hour and then justify it by oh, well, they're making tips, which happens all throughout the country. But in DC, they're like, well, we can do better than this. And so they passed it, and then the council just voted to overturn it. So I love democracy. That's so awesome.
Yeah. So now there is a redo Initiative 82, and the composition of the council. Hopefully, it does look better since then. We have Janice Lewis George, who knocked out Brandon Todd 2 years ago. She's a socialist. So the composition has gotten better. And after this election cycle, I think it will be, fingers crossed, definitely good enough to make sure that it doesn't happen again. But so Zachary Parker is running against Vincent Orange for Ward 5. They had a debate a few months ago, and Parker had just announced that he is gay. He came out as gay. Not an easy thing to do. And then Vincent Orange, who this guy has been in office in and out for a very long time, very corrupt person, formerly very anti-gay, possibly still anti-gay, because his statement towards the end of the debate, he just like sneaks this in here. He says, "I'm puzzled here tonight. Look, the chairman of my campaign is openly gay and has been openly gay for a very long time. Some of my top advisors are openly gay. Twice I've heard Mr. Parker here say that he's openly gay and is espousing to help. But he was an elected official for almost 4 years, and all the things that we discussed here tonight, he could have helped those young kids. He could have helped adults by just being that proud LGBTQ leader, and it just seems like a matter of convenience when you hear him talk." And that's what he says.
So is he either criticizing him for not coming out soon enough, or he's accusing him of lying about being gay?
It's not clear. I think I guess the generous interpretation there was that it's not soon enough. Still a terrible thing to say. And he's like, well, I'm just puzzled because many of others have said that they're gay and it helps people, but to just become openly gay a few months ago seems like a matter of convenience. And to say I'm the only going to be the openly gay person on the council just doesn't add up. He says it just doesn't add up to me. But the best part about this, because remember in the beginning, he says, the chairman of my campaign is openly gay. His chairman of his campaign is a guy named Franklin Garcia, who was asked by the Washington City paper, "Are you gay?" And he said, "No."
Oh my God, that's so funny. The guy's just watching like, why are you calling me gay?
Yeah.
You know, Seinfeld, not that there's anything wrong with that, but like,
Right.
but he's like, what the fuck, dude? Like, you know, I'm over here trying to meet women after the, you know, the big show we were having. You're calling me gay on stage? It's not gonna
And he really tries to smooth it over for him. And he's like, well, I am very much a part of the LGBTQ community as an ally. But he was thinking of somebody else. Is he basically?
Oh man, that's so
at
funny.
best, his campaign, the candidate mixed up him with another gay guy.
Well, it shows you how much he, you know, thinks about these people and cares about them, and that's a quality you want.
That's right. So yeah, Ward 5, looking at that. Ward 1, there's a few other wards, but Ward 3 is a big one too. I don't know who the good candidate is in Ward 3, but one of them is Matt Iglesias' friend who's running, so my instinct is to just vote against him. But
is he gay? I'm gonna, if anyone ever attacks me on that basis, I'm gonna be like, I'm just gonna pull this guy's move and be like, I do a podcast with Anders. He's gay. He's always talking about how he has a boyfriend. Wait, I misheard him for 5 years. Sorry.
That's me. I'm gay for not gay for pay, but I will be gay if you need to get out of an argument.
Sure. Okay, that's good to know.
I'm gay for the sake of argument.
I appreciate your services.
Speaking of gay for the sake of argument, apparently Mayor Bowser is gay. I had no idea.
Well, apparently, I mean, that's I don't know if that was like, you know, that was hinted at. In the
yeah, that's right. We shouldn't out her. I know we have the power to do that.
Well, I also don't know if that was like, he was even saying that was 100%. I think he just said, I think, you know.
It's not, yeah, it's very unclear. That took me by surprise. You know, there's a part of me that hopes it's not true. But,
well, I was going to say I had never thought about it, and that's why, you know, oh, now it's like weird. Oh, I had never thought about it. Maybe she is, maybe she isn't. But it sounds like you've thought about it.
I've thought about her. I'll leave it at that. But she is, of course, up for re-election, and it is a big race. As we're saying, this is a truly, I mean, there's a big probably, the smart money is still on her, and I'm saying that to not jinx it, not because I necessarily think it. But there is a chance that things will change in D.C., and I think this is an important time in local politics throughout the country because, and of course, every city is different, but I'm looking at progressive cities with, you know, the sort of liberal characters and you know, labor movements and places that are are considered to be very progressive, but do not always act that way. Because, as we were just saying, that really is the edge of liberalism, arguably of neoliberalism, is the local governments. They expose how little the liberal state actually wants to do. And that could be changing. I don't want to get too optimistic, but in Boston, there's a progressive mayor. She's not a socialist. She's not DSA endorsed. And I think that's perfectly fair. She is, however, a departure from a lot of mayors throughout the country. She's actually talking about social investment. She's, doing things a bit differently and actually trying to come up with a centralized plan for things like climate. So at best, we could see a mayor like that in D.C. And I am cautiously optimistic about that trend of like progressive mayors and throughout the country. I still do think that if we're talking electoral politics, city councils, legislatures, that's where you should focus. If you're an organization like DSA, and you should try to build up the composition there. But this is a trend that I hope continues, and I'm eager to see what happens in DC on the 21st. You can vote then or early if you're a resident, and to find out who you should vote for, which I don't know, are we allowed to do endorsements?
I don't know. Just put the regular podcast asterisk on this. If it's illegal, then it's a joke. If it's not, then listen to us.
I mean, arguably, if we were to endorse, it would, probably have no impact. But if to any impact it had would be a negative one. So arguably, it doesn't count as an endorsement.
Yeah, we should do the kiss of death to the opponent.
Right? Oh yeah, I would love to do a kiss of death to Mario Bowser. Anyway, we will be talking.
What are you, Mario?
To a very interesting guy. He is a DC native, co-founder of WeAct Radio, which is an excellent institution, which I am excited to share with our listeners to let them know more about. So without further ado, let's go to that interview with Kymone Freeman.
Roll the tape.
Yes, we are joined. It is a couple weeks away from the most important election of our lifetimes, as they say every election, but this one possibly, because they keep getting more important. It's undeniable. But this is an important one that I'm very invested in, because I just must confess, I just moved back to New York City from Washington, D.C., where our guest is joining us from. He is driving around. What section are you in, by the way?
I'm in Chinatown. Stop Asian hate.
Okay. Cool.
Podcasting like while driving a car is a very cool move.
Right, it's underutilized. But I should introduce our guest. His name is Kymone Freeman, and he is a co-founder of WeAct Radio in DC. Thank you for joining us, Kymone.
It's an honor to be here with you, and peace and blessings to your listening audience.
And why don't we start by WeAct Radio? For those who are not familiar, what is it, and how did it begin?
WeAct Radio is basically a mission-driven business that has utilized disruption as a business model. We are underwritten by Social Security Works and my business partner, Alex Lawson's, which gives me the freedom to not be beholden to advertisers. Like the Pacific Network is not beholden to advertisers, but they also are beholden to their listeners, where only like 8% of their listeners actually support those programs. And unfortunately, 1 hour of progressive talk in America is compared to 10 hours of right-wing talk in America, because the right-wing talk is solely supported by the underwritten of the right-wing businesses, big pharma, defense contractors. That's why, them losing advertisers when they offend the public doesn't work for them. Rush Limbaugh had no advertisers, and he was probably one of the highest paid talk hosts in American history. But WeAct Radio started 2011. I like to tell everybody it was November 11, 2011 at 11 a.m. It's a famous go-go song in DC called the One-on-One. And that was a result because Kathy Hughes, co-founder of Radio One, the largest conglomerate of black owned stations in the country, was on her high horse being disingenuous in regards to the performance arts tax. The performance arts tax was sponsored by former Congressman John Conyers, who basically stipulated that the performing artists should be paid when the record is played, not just the owner of the publishing, because a lot of artists, black people in general, and artists in general, black people in particular, and artists in general, have been robbed of their publishing. And so even though their names are noteworthy and their records are big, they die destitute because they don't benefit from the residuals that publishing offers. And so he instituted the performance arts tax so that the artists could be compensated as well. And she fought that tooth and nail, saying that this was a direct attack on black radio. John Conyers, by the way, who was the sponsor of jazz bills and bills, is attacking black radio. And I just felt that she was being disingenuous. And as a result of that, we put together a panel discussion talking about if we want to save black radio, we need to change black radio. Because if you listen to any mainstream black radio station today, I urge your audience to check out any mainstream black radio station, format station, Monday through Friday, morning rush hour, and you will hear grown-ass men making prank calls at people's jobs. With all that's going on in the world, this is what they would do with millions of listeners, okay? And this is what she said that we must save. And WeAct Radio put a panel debating that we want to save it, we need to change it. And someone put the charge to us that if we wanted to change it, then why don't we create our own station? And that set off a chain of events, and that's what we did. And so we created what has been called the best social justice station in Washington, D.C., according to the city paper. So that's the backstory, and we just celebrated our 10th anniversary, and we're in Anacostia. Our building is paid for. We are brick and mortar. We have a performance venue that we created, an outdoor performance venue, a 420 friendly beer garden, I might add, that holds 300 people. And so we are an institution in Washington, D.C. now.
Absolutely. Well, that's a great story. And congratulations on the anniversary, by the way.
We're going to go ahead and cut the prank call segment of the show from what we're doing right now. I'm just kidding. We don't do that.
I've been known to do a prank call or two in my day, but I had to retire because I was too good at it. Not saying I would never bring it back, but I would only do it to punch up. I think that's the problem with a lot of radio shows. They punch down on, like you said, people are just working a Pizza Hut instead of a senator's office, which I love to do prank calls on.
Ooh, fun.
But I think it's a really important. WeAct is a really important institution because we're on a podcast. There are a lot of left-wing podcasts, and it's obviously I think that's good. But terrestrial radio is really an untapped sort of resource, and it's very hard to break into. You guys have managed to do it, and as you said, the right has been basically monopolizing it.
Well, we was able to do it for 5 years, 4 years. The first 4 years we had a terrestrial contract, AM, and then in 5th year we got a low power FM signal, and we was about to go big with that one. But once again, Radio One took us to court and filed, basically was saying that David has a slingshot that might poke Goliath's eye out. That this 100-watt low-power FM signal was a threat to their business, and so Big Bank took Little Bank, and they filed injunction after injunction, and we lost the low-power FM signal, and it's now been split up and consumed by Radio One. You have a low-power FM signal in Maryland. You have a low-power FM signal in Virginia, in the D.C. area. The D.C. proper, the one that we had, no longer exists. This is just because of the politics of what we have. So we did the good fight, but we lost on the terrestrial battlefield.
Yeah, R.I.P. Yeah, I guess I'm thinking of the Virginia signal. And so how were they? Why were they allowed to do that? Why were they allowed to just shut you down?
This is America, and free speech is money. And the more money you got, the more speech you have. If you don't have any money, they're basically telling you STFU.
Jesus. Wow, that's pretty incredible. I wasn't aware of that aspect of it. That they another basically a competitor. It sounds like they thought you would.
Well, I'm honored that they looked at WeAct Radio as a competitor. Because we actually Radio 1 started ironically with a small AM radio station. It's actually been documented by Hollywood by a film called Talk to Me with Petey Grain. Don Cheadle played Petey Grain. Taraji P. Henson was in it. It was WOL. And so they know better than most how much damage you can do with a small station. And I guess they didn't want us to replicate their success.
Yeah. Wow. And I think this type of media is really important, especially in places like DC, where a lot of America, I feel like, doesn't understand Washington, D.C. at all. Like, we know there's the Capitol there, there's politicians and stuff, but we forget that there's a whole other city with, nearly 1 million people living, eating, breathing, pissing, shitting, fucking, like it's, a very substantial place and a huge community. But what do you think people in most of America don't appreciate about the District of Columbia, or how would you sort of explain it on a social level to somebody, from like West Coast or someone who's not familiar?
I think that most people are not aware that we have taxation without representation. We are denied a vote in Congress, and that Congress, a racist country, I may add, decides has to approve the budget in D.C. It determines has a final say of a lot of the governance in Washington, D.C. For example, at one time, at the height of the AIDS pandemic, the AIDS infection rate in Washington, D.C. was 12 times the national rate. Jeez. And that's because of the fact that Congress denied D.C. From funding. So the fact that the only jurisdiction in America that was prohibited from using its own money, not federal money, its own tax dollars to fund a needle exchange program, had these consequences, because 30% of all the AIDS infection cases was directly attributed to dirty needles. So that means for over a decade, 30% every year of new AIDS cases was attributed to this. And so the Congress has a 300% markup of AIDS infection cases in Washington, D.C. based on this rule, this taxation without representation, which ironically is what this country went to the American Revolution War was about. It was about taxation without representation. That's what the Tea Party was doing. It was a riot. And so I think if people in America realize that the real reason the federal government doesn't want D.C. to have 2 senators and a vote in Congress is because it would tip the tide of power in this country, where we got this good cop, bad cop, standstill, 50-50 where nothing gets done. Mm-hmm. If D.C. become a state, it would tip the balance of power in the country. So that is the most important thing that people need to realize, that the issue of statehood in Washington, D.C. can tip the balance of power in America. And I think after January 6th, people should always pay attention to what's going on in the nation's capital.
That's right. Yeah. And two, I feel like a lot of Americans don't realize democracy, insofar as it does exist with DC's local government, is a very new phenomenon as well. It wasn't until the 1970s that Washingtonians could even elect their own representatives for local government. It was just a congressional committee.
It was a plantation.
Yeah, it was. I think very much. A colonial sort of system. And people who have heard of DC as a city, the rest of DC, I guess, may be familiar with Marion Barry, and of course, there's some connotations that come with that. But that's another thing I wanted to ask you about too. Is what was the impact of Barry? We did do an episode about Marion Barry a year or two ago, but just to kind of to show people who may not be super familiar, like what do people not appreciate about Marion Barry, and why does he continue to this day to have staying power among the residents of Washington?
The residents of Washington, D.C. will tell you that he's mayor for life because he created the largest black middle class in America. Unfortunately, the majority of that middle class moved to Maryland and took their funds with them rather than investing in their own communities, which led to created the opportunity for gentrification to come in to buy up land cheaply. But he stood up to the good old boy network, whereas the nepotism of getting city contracts, he democratized that. He created a summer youth employment program that guaranteed young people and not just kids. It was up to 21 at the time. I'm a benefit of the Marion Barry Summer Youth Employment Program, and this program wasn't flipping burgers for the summer. You'll be working in an architectural firm. You could be working in a law firm like I was myself. I was doing paralegal work before I knew what a paralegal was. So he was like, if you're doing business in the city, you have to expose these young kids to the real world. And that's what he did. And it created opportunities for people such as myself and made us see beyond our neighborhood. That's what Marion Barry did. He also, I don't want to credit them too heavily, but BET Networks exists because of Marion Barry. He created billionaires, millionaires, because he gave Robert Johnson the land of which BT was launched on for like $1 a month, and but he had the deed to that land, and the deed to that land enabled him to go to a bank to get a loan to fund his business. And so he's responsible for putting BT on the map. Unfortunately, BT has been a sorry excuse for moving black culture forward. But Marion Barry stood up to the institutional white supremacists that stated that only those people deserve to have access to resources. Only those people are able to run governance. No one can ever say that he stole money. No one could ever say that he had a misuse of his abuse of power. He just had a substance abuse program, and he liked women. And so the system knew what his weaknesses were, and they went after him for it. Everyone seen the tape. If you watch the tape, the incriminating tape, you could clearly see why he was in that room. And he wasn't in that room to get high. He came for another reason. And he even told the whole world why he came into the reason.
That's a good point.
Into that room for what reason. So they set him up, and they spent millions of dollars for him to get a conviction for a misdemeanor because he was standing in the way of gentrification. He had rent control. He was standing in the way of a free fall for developers in the city. And after his demise, now you see that DC has the most rapid rate of gentrification of any city in America and the greatest disparity of wealth of any city in America. These are things that he had fought against, and that's why the system came after him. And that's why the people to this day still love him.
Yeah, and it's definitely worth noting as well. He was DC's first democratically elected mayor, the first mayor elected by the people of DC. And I think there's a really marked shift when he leaves office.
And he was the most powerful mayor in the country because as a DC's unique relationship, when we first allowed home rule from the Congress, granted us home rule because we're not a state, he didn't have to go through another tier of scrutiny. Initially, he was in charge of the entire city independently. Mm-hmm. And once they, it's a famous line out of the film Malcolm X, when Denzel Washington had led the protests when the police had beat one of the brothers up, and they marched down to the hospital, and until they found out the brother was okay. And then the police chief comes out and said, that's too much power for one man to have. And so that's what the federal government did. It said it's too much power for one man to have. So they invoked the control board.
Right.
And that's what we still have today.
Right, because they knew he was coming back. So yeah, he police officer is indicted in, I believe, 89, and then Sharon Pratt Kelly is elected, and you can see a very marked shift. You go back and you watch those debates and those speeches from her. She's talking about privatization, which wasn't a term that was used as much back then. Now it has some bad juju associated with it, but back then she was all about that. And by the time Marion Barry is able to rehabilitate himself and get elected again in 1994, it's his hands are tied in a way. There's the Fiscal Control Board, which really makes it difficult for him to do the kind of social investment that he was able to early on in his tenure.
You're absolutely correct. But the real architect of gentrification, as we now know it, the most rapid form of gentrification of any city in America, as we now know it, is Anthony Williams, who, ironically, if you want to believe in coincidences, he was the head of the control board. And then he became mayor for 2 terms, and now he's the head of the Federal City Commission. The Federal City Commission in D.C. Pretty much operates like ALEC. For those who are unaware, ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, which brought you such laws as Stand Your Ground, so that they can spear more gun sales, and they're funded by Walmart. This is creating space where major corporations and lawmakers can meet in private and decide behind closed doors what laws are they going to put on the books. And it's obviously a fascist cookbook. And the Federal City Commission is the local version in the nation's capital of the American Legislative Exchange Council. Everyone should. Okay. Yeah, so I was just saying that I think that everyone should familiarize themselves with ALEC on a national level and the Federal City Commission on the local level here in Washington, D.C., and see the similarities and how they operate.
Wow. Well, that brings me to a question. I think you and I would probably agree on. Brings me to an interesting question. I think you and I would both agree on who the best mayor of D.C. was. I don't think we have to say, but as far as the worst mayor of D.C. of all time, who would you put in that slot?
The worst mayor. Wow, that's a tough one because the mayor that done the most damage would have been Armstrong Williams, but the most unpopular mayor, ironically, wasn't Armstrong Williams. It was Fenty, and it's because Fenty was so arrogant, and he took over the school system, invoked a school. I think they call it school chancellor. She's the wife of I can't think of his name. Kevin. He used to play for Phoenix Suns. He became mayor of Sacramento. Michelle Rhee, that's her name. Michelle Rhee. And she's fired like thousands of teachers, so he was the most unpopular mayor. He was very arrogant. So it's a toss up between Armstrong Williams and Fenty, Adrian Fenty.
Yeah, Fenty, I would have to say, is my choice, and a lot of it does have to do with education, which is an issue. Leads nicely into this year's election. As you mentioned, he asserted mayoral control of the schools. So if people aren't familiar with that, of course, most cities have school boards, and you elect the school board, which they still have in DC. However, all the decisions are still made at the mayoral level, and that's something that the current mayor, Muriel Bowser, would like to retain. What do you think of Bowser? What has her administration been like so far? And do you think she deserves a third term?
Well, you always start with something nice. And so let me say something nice about Muriel. I appreciate the symbolism of her creating the Black Lives Matter Plaza and what it did to, poke a finger in the eye of Trump at the time. I do realize that Black people still was being brutalized by the police at Black Lives Matter Plaza, but her enduring legacy, long after she's gone, it would still be there. She created another national attraction. And during 2020, to see everyone that came out to visit that location, it was a special feeling. It was a special thing. And the fact that she altered the White House address from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue to 1600 Black Lives Matter Plaza, I think needs to be acknowledged. So I'm appreciative of that. Unfortunately, I think most of her I also think she was a good steward during the pandemic. I think she handled the pandemic well in the city. Outside of that, she works for those people. She inherited Fenty's playbook, Armstrong, Anthony Williams, not Armstrong Williams, that's another sellout. Anthony Williams, the head of the Federal City Commission, she rubber stamps whatever comes down that pipeline, and she has turned the keys over to a developer. In fact, we did an interview last night with Ed Lazier, the former executive director of DC Fiscal Policy Institute, and the analogy that we used was that she's an Uber driver and the developers decide where the car goes. And that's pretty much been her administration. And so for her to get a third term, I'm glad to see that she's been challenged on this round, because of her second election, she went unchallenged. Her first election, the incumbent was facing false allegations right before the vote. So people just naturally geared to her. And then, of course, when the election was over, all the charges against her was dropped. So I don't think she's really won a fair race yet. I think this is her first one. So we'll see what happens. But she's been challenged by some contenders, and it's a foot race. And unfortunately, I wish we had a ranked choice voting system where people can rank their choices. And so the actual winner would be representative of the largest support in the city, because it's hard to unseat an incumbent when you're splitting the opposition vote. But in this situation, you may have a situation where the challengers combined may have more votes than the incumbent. And if that's the case, I think it will speak volumes to her and her policies.
Right. And it's even a bigger problem because they both, not kidding, have the same last name. Both of her challengers are named Councilman White. Neither of them are white, for the record. I only have a short window where I can still do this in my stand-up, but DC might have a mayor who's white. It's a very real possibility. But do you think that's a problem, though, that because they have some different issue positions, but they're broadly both coming at it from the left. We have Councilman Robert White, who's an at-large representative, and then Trayon White, who's representing, is it Ward 8?
Yeah, he represents one of the poorest sections of towns, was Ward 8, which is also the ward that houses WeAct Radio Anacostia Studios. Oh,
yeah. So, they both do really important work. And that's what I'm kind of nervous about is, Trayon White, very involved in the community, a mentee of Marion Barry. And then Robert White, who's, progressive. They both, I think, are mostly the same on the issues. Trayon White did vote to overturn the minimum wage, tip minimum wage referendum. But why do you think it was they weren't able to work something out and just, pick one white and go with that?
Let me just say that Trayon was ill-advised in voting against the tip wage law, because and it wasn't voting against it. It was voting to rescind what the majority of the city had voted for.
Right.
We had an initiative that passed, so it should have become law, and they conspired to rescind that. And he buckled under pressure, because at the time he was in a hot seat, been attacked by Washington Post. That's when he stuck his foot in his mouth and said that Jews control the weather. Uh-huh. And then they came for him.
They did a fact check of that. They didn't find any evidence for it. But
I just want to put out there that in all of that, they never mentioned the fact that there is a organization called HARP, that the government ran. It was in Alaska, and it was studying the effects of altering weather patterns. So the ability, the technology to alter weather patterns does exist. It was just that he put it on an ethnic group, and that was wrong. But he should have said the government, and he should have explicitly said HARP. and we all know this. You can drop stuff on the clouds, dry ice or whatever to make it rain. Like, you can alter weather patterns. And so I urge everyone to look up HARP, and then you can see what we're talking about. Even the governor, what's the wrestling governor from Minnesota?
Ventura. Jesse Ventura.
Yeah. He did a whole show on HARP, but not one time did the Washington Post mention that, it sounds far-fetched, but there's some technology over here, but he's wrong for this, that has made him look crazy, and so that was a young person's mistake. But that's why he did that. And to this day, I always disagree with him on that issue. But other than that, him and Robert White, are progressives, and they got similar background issues. And, and to answer your question on why they never got together, I was hoping that they would sit down and talk like strategic thinking men and say, well, Robert White's a stronger candidate because he's a citywide candidate. Trayon is not popular west of the river. And so, Trayon, give me your support. Rubber stamp everything you want while I'm there. And if you don't like it, then challenge me in the next mayoral race. But unfortunately, I think Robert White made a miscalculation because they decided to try to get Trayon kicked off the ballot by challenging the validity of his signatures that got him on the ballot in the first place. And of course, that was fugazi, and they failed to do so. So now it was a personal vendetta between the two whites. And so there's no hope of having, a coming to Jesus moment with the two, unfortunately. And it's just a sad case of affairs when egos get involved instead of looking at the bigger picture. And I hope that we still got the election's not to the 21st. Would be great if that was to change, but we'll see.
Right. It would be a real shame if they did them in, as you were saying, if most people vote for one of the whites and not for Mayor Bowser, and she squeaks by anyway, that would. Let me point out
that ranked choice voting would take care of all that, because then you don't have any spoilers. You get the rank. Here's your first choice, your second choice, your third choice, and they tally up everything. And whoever has the highest percentage of support is the winner. And that's what we need to get to. But that's why they don't want it, because without having ranked choice voting, you can just run 3 or 4 people against an incumbent to preserve the status quo. And that's what the system is not trying to move on. Yeah,
and it's one reason I'm really, my card's on the table. I think Robert White has the better shot, and one of the reasons that I'm excited about his campaign is he's talking about a jobs guarantee, which in some ways is a throwback to the Barry years, right? The summer jobs program you're talking about, but it also goes completely against the entire trajectory from the end of that era on, in which there's no money for anything. That's what they always say. Where are you going to get the money? How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? And someone's finally saying, we'll find the money. We don't need to give tax breaks to ultra wealthy Washingtonians or throw money at the Metropolitan Police Department, which is another irony here, is that the only issue where there is always money in the budget for is the police. And a proposal of the current mayor is to add 4,000 new officers to the DC Police Department. Do you think that would actually make an impact on crime in a healthy and productive way?
First, let me say that the most the safest places in the world don't have the most police. The safest communities don't have the most police. It's the same all over the world. Wherever you see concentrations of poverty, you see violence and crime. Wherever you see concentrations of wealth, you see peace and tranquility. It's the same all over the world. It's not rocket science. And so what people need to understand is that DC already has the highest per capita of police of any city in America. We already have that. You know how many different police jurisdictions and departments are in the nation's capital, which made January 6th even more unbelievable.
Yeah.
That there was not enough cops. Really? But let me say this too. You said where we're gonna get the money. Another thing people need to understand, and that Washington D.C. has more speed cameras than New York City. Let me repeat myself. Washington D.C. is half the size of Brooklyn, but you have more speed cameras than all of New York City. In fact, Washington D.C. was the location for the very first speed camera in America.
Wow.
Okay. And so they're getting money hand over foot. Anyone who drove in Washington D.C. in the past 5 years can tell you speed tickets, they're getting money. You know, if it could be posted 25 miles an hour, you going 35 miles an hour. You know, not really a big deal, but that's $100 ticket.
Yeah.
That's $100 ticket that will double in 30 days. So when you talk about where they're getting the money from, they get it from that ticket money. You know, and the fact that whenever anyone says where we getting the money from is on the front, because whenever it's something more police, they don't say where we're gonna get the money from.
Yeah.
When it's time of the war, they don't say where we're gonna get the money from. I never heard the Department of War. That's the original name of the Pentagon Department of Defense. The original name was Department of War.
Yeah.
They changed the name because it didn't sound too good. You know, but they never had trouble raising money. And so we need to acknowledge these things. And that's why we are in a unique position right now, because the pandemic has created a crisis. And that crisis has given birth to opportunities. Normally, crises give opportunities to the oppressor. In this case, it's the first time that poor people got a vacation, and the opportunities are leaning towards the working class. Because why? Oh, well, we had to cancel some rent. We had to, people got to stay at home. People had the time to think. So now that people are like, wait a minute, all this time I could have been working from home. I ain't had to been driving through rush hour traffic and going to child care. I could have stayed. Then that's why you see downtowns all across America. The economic structure of these cities have changed and irreparably changed. And we need to acknowledge those things. And eventually we're going to see, health care for everybody. Eventually we're going to see a guaranteed income for everybody. And these things are inevitable. And they're just trying to Humpty Dumpty's fell down, trying to put them, all the king's men, or trying to put them back together again. And it's not going to work. And so they're scratching their head, trying to figure out how they're going to maintain and preserve the status quo. But that cat's out the bag, literally.
Yeah, I mean, there really seems like there was this kind of sense of inevitability from a lot of people in D.C., but Bowser's camp specifically, that this was not going to be an election, right? That this is not a campaign that they needed to take seriously, that she could just run on her merits, and, that Washington trusts her, and that things have been going well for most people. And, just look at what she's done was just open the door to let developers do absolutely whatever they wanted. Do you think she has underestimated the opposition so far? And do you think there's an actual chance that she could lose? And I should mention, by the way, if you're on the fence about Mayor Bowser, she is single. And if she is not a reelected mayor, she will have more time to mingle. And if you look her up online, not going to add my commentary there. There are, probably some gentlemen, some other folks in the district who would probably like that scenario. How realistic do you think it is that she'll lose?
Interesting angle.
I don't think Muriel likes baseball, if you know what I mean. I don't think
I never even considered that. Wow, that's how bad my gaydar is.
But I tell you this is I have mixed feelings when it comes to Muriel Bowser, because she announced, ironically, her candidacy for her initial mayoral run. Well, she announced the candidacy from the front yard of her parents' home. Her first media appearance as a mayoral candidate was, guess what? On WeAct Radio on the Rock Newman show. Okay.
Wow.
the Rock Newman show in our Anacostia studio was her first media appearance as a mayoral candidate. So I've known Muriel for a good while, and it's one of those situations where you have a good person who gets into a position and they just play ball. And I think that's what she's done. She's a good person who's just playing ball. She's not a change agent, which is why DC, among other disparities, is the most dangerous city for a black woman of any social economic to give birth. But yet at the same time, we have a black woman as mayor, and that's not a glaring issue for the majority of people. We have a situation where there's 8 wards in Washington D.C., and the 2 wards east of the river is the colored section that's left, what's left of Chocolate City. Obviously the poorest section as well, have been neglected a bookstore for over 25 years. There's over 40 bookstores in Washington, D.C., but in the blackest, poorest sections of town, there was 0 for 25 years. But at the same time, we have a proliferation of liquor stores. At the same time, we have, a food desert. And these things have been allowed to go on. And so, whenever someone says, the status quo or you're conservative, these are the issues that need to be addressed. And I don't think Muriel, in the 2 terms that she has been mayor, has done a good job in challenging the status quo or being a change agent. I think she has been playing ball, and she has been for the continued economic development of the city at the expense of the community development of the people who are here.
Right. No, I think that's a really important point to understand, or to overstand, as you say, is that it's not that she's a bad person, right? She genuinely does believe this stuff. She's part of an institution in DC, the Green Team, the Green Machine, as it's called, really, in a way, started with Fenty and has continued with her and her protege, Brandon Todd. And it's, a group of people who really do believe that you just got to let capitalism rip. They believe in some guidelines, but ultimately, they think private capital and private investment is going to solve people's problems. And we've seen that especially in wards 7 and 8, that is not the case, because, a grocery store, if an investor doesn't think it makes sense to open one there and they don't think they're going to make enough money, then they're not going to do it. And you need to have some public will there that actually makes this stuff happen. But it's interesting.
I just want to put out there. Muriel Bowser loves Lil Wayne. I just want to throw that out there.
Really?
Yeah. So she gets box seats to go see Lil Wayne every time he comes to town. Like so she gets it. But there was no real push for her to address these issues, because the issues that I just shared with you are primarily affecting people who don't vote, because they have been led to believe that they, the greatest power is convincing people they don't have any. So they don't get involved in the politics. And we don't have civic engagement in schools anymore. These people have been, they now believe that they don't have the power or the capacity to change their conditions. So they just submit to them. And so from a business standpoint, there was no real push for her to address these issues. She's going with the people who put her in office, and she's delivering those deliverables that and promises that was being made. Now, but I think the crisis has now created opportunities where people are, we're beyond a breaking point, and that the city is going to have to address it. Like, how many people are behind in their rent in this city? They can't even evict all these people. That's why they keep kicking the can down the road, extending the eviction moratorium, because they don't have the capacity to evict 20% of a city.
Right.
So let's be clear that that's why it's not business as usual anymore. And this is the first race that she's feeling some heat. I don't think she's ran a very good campaign. I didn't even see any advertisements from her until late in the race. And that's when she saw that Robert White was gaining traction. He was very successful in raising a lot of money, because I told you the opposition is there. The question is, does he have enough with Trayon skimming off the top east of the river? Can he pull this off without that section of town? Because Muriel has never been, she doesn't even campaign on that section of town. She had a campaign office right next door to WeAct Radio that she never went into. So because again, she didn't have a reason to. These people are not politically engaged. So again, I'm not attacking her. And you asked me a question, I'm answering it to the best of my ability in terms of what has happened. So yes, the ladder has been left, as an African proverb, the door is open and the ladder has been left down. The only question remains, does Robert White have enough to climb up?
That's excellent question. I hope the answer is yes. One thing I was kind of disappointed in as well is Phil Mendelssohn is another big obstacle to any progress in Washington, D.C. He's the enemy of basically every social movement, most social movements. Guy has a mustache. He dresses like a gangster. I don't know. I went to an event once and he was in straight up a top hat with the trench coat, and he looked like he was in a neo-noir flick or something. But he is an opponent. He's now being challenged. He was challenged by Ed Lazer, who you mentioned earlier, but this time he's been challenged by Aaron Palmer, who seems like a great candidate. But I was kind of hoping that it would be somebody from Ward 7 or Ward 8 who can tap into that constituency. Do you think there's a chance, though, that we could bring Mendo down?
As well, it's always a chance. But I think Ed Lazer was a much stronger candidate than Aaron Palmer. I think Aaron Palmer is a good candidate, and it would be a victory for the people. Aaron was able to pull out an upset. And Aaron Palmer has the support of Ed Lazer as well. But I'm a little conflicted on this one because Phil Mendelssohn is kind of like my favorite asshole on the council. If you was running a club, you want an asshole at the front door. Hey, I know so and so. I'm on the list. I don't see you on the list. Can you call so and so? You want the asshole at the door. And Phil Mendelssohn is the asshole on the city council. He's gonna always bring up the wackest stuff, and it gives you something to fight about. And WeAct Radio has been involved with so many victories in stopping some of his asshole tactics. And so I kind of have enjoyed this back and forth with Phil. And if he's gone, I'm going to kind of miss him in that. He's something to fight about. You know what I'm saying? Get me riled up. I'm an angry black man in therapy, and and it's kind of different. Like when you sit down and have a drink with your favorite asshole. I've had drinks with my favorite asshole, and we have mutual friends. I'm trying to understand how he thinks. And because he started out as like this socialist thinking hippie, but he became what he is now. The grumpy old man on the council. But he's not racist. He's just an equal opportunity asshole. So hopefully Aaron Palmer can pull something out. And if he's gone, I'm going to miss my equal opportunity asshole.
Well, one thing that really frustrates me about him and Bowser and a lot of other just figures who are at the executive city level is they kind of play this game of hot potato with they get blamed something. They get blamed for something and they'll say, oh, that's the mayor's fault. I'm not in charge of that. That's the mayor's fault. Then she'll try to toss it back to Phil Mendelssohn, or she'll toss it to John Falcicchio, who is the deputy mayor. And one of those hot potatoes.
I got to give a shout out to John Falcicchio, excuse me. He's a good guy. Appreciate John. He's very receptive. And I just want to give him a shout out right there in case he's watching this podcast. Please continue.
Yes.
And one more point is that Aaron Palmer, because when we talk about Phil Mendelssohn, the councilman of the chair, he's the second most powerful person in the city. Because in D.C., you have 13 council members and the mayor. And the chairman of the council is in the number 2 seat. And Aaron Palmer thinks that the council of the chair has too much power, and he's willing to democratize some of that and relegate it equally distributed amongst the council members. Just want to put it out there. So that would really makes her an exciting candidate. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but these are thoughts that came up while you were speaking, and I apologize.
No, that's an important point because
I checked I checked the Patreon. He does listen to the podcast.
Shout out
one of the
deputy mayor Falcicchio. I don't know. Sorry, I'm not going to learn how to say your name. I apologize.
Yeah, me and John was kicking it at the National Cannabis Festival, so we we enjoy some of the same things.
Okay.
Oh, maybe he does this with the podcast.
Yeah, that's a possibility. But that is a sort of an oddity of the DC system is the council chair. So basically, like the Speaker of the House is elected directly by the citizens. So this is like we were voting for Nancy Pelosi or the Speaker of the House directly. But one thing that the kind of hot potato that has been bugging me is COVID relief, because there was federal aid passed, a couple years ago now. And a lot of it has taken a really long time to get into the hands of renters. And it's just been like this, back and forth thing at the city government. No one can account for where it is in a lot of cases. You have to fill out a gazillion forms to get it. What's going on with that? And what can people expect in the coming future? Do you think we're going to be able to get that relief to people?
Well, again, that's some of the crisis creating opportunities. First of all, you have to have that demand there, and this election is kind of a litmus test on, the last book from Martin Luther King was where do we go from here? Chaos or community? We are at that juncture right now, and it's going to be a litmus test on do we take a hard left or hard right? And you've had candidates in this race who would not win, but there's been candidates in this race talking like Barack Obama. Oh, we've gone too far left. Too far left? So the country has clearly gone far right. Trump, Proud Boys, January 6th. So if the car has veered far right, how do you correct it? You're going to have to go a hard left.
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And what is too left? What is too left? What? Healthcare for everybody? That's too left. After a pandemic even. Guaranteed income for everybody? That's too left. Or even because billionaires have doubled their income during the pandemic, what's too left? Having equitable education opportunities for every child? Because Malcolm X said that, when you live in a poor community, you get a poor education. You get a poor education, you get a poor paying job. And that poor paying job enables you to live in a poor community. It's a very vicious cycle. And it's still been enforced in America because by and large, the public schools are funded, and charter schools as well, are funded by taxpayer money, property taxes. Mm-hmm. And if you live in a poor area, you're getting low funding for that school. And you're in a high income area, you're getting high funding for that school. And that preserves the status quo. So too left is rocking the boat. And that's what they really are here to say. And the question remains on whether or not people realize that when, how do I say this? When it has changed, shit has changed. Now what has been politically inevitable is what was politically impossible is now politically inevitable. And I just want to know whether or not people have sensed that. It's kind of like the Muhammad Ali and George Foreman fight when he got him to punch himself out. He was the bigger, stronger fighter. Everybody expected him to win, but Ali sensed when the time was right, when he was winded, and the power dynamics had shifted, and then he went on the assertion. I'm saying to you that we are no longer on the defensive. We are now on the offense. Because far too often we are so clear on what we are against that we're not as clear on what we are for. And when we get into position on what we are for, then we need to know exactly what we want. But we first got to know that it's possible.
Yeah, those are very encouraging words. And I think whatever happens in the election, I think the sort of zeitgeist is changing in terms of people waking up, being done with accepting the status quo, interest in a new system other than capitalism, and whether that happens through elections or labor or housing organizing, direct action, whatever. I think, especially in a place like DC, which is a progressive city, but the institutions of the city don't reflect that, or they have not recently. I think this is some fertile ground. So definitely excited for the 21st. Are there any other races as we're closing out that you're on the lookout for, and you think the left could make some waves?
Yeah, I think that Ward 5 is an interesting race because you have Zachary Parker, who is definitely going to flip tables like his name was Jesus Christ. And we can see some of his politics being a game changer in this city. He's talking about equitable distribution of wealth in the city, which we need to definitely get around and support, because in Washington, D.C., the average white family has 81 times the average wealth of the average black family. You know, I did not say 81%. I said 81 multiples. Okay. And so when you have that type of scenario, and you say, well, you know, the city's just getting more expensive. Well, then you are enforcing black people to get moved out and enforcing the city to become wealthy and white, you know, just by doing that. Back in the day, you would have signs that say white only, color only. Now it's a price tag, which is, it serves as the same thing. But that's not to say that all white people are wealthy. So anyone who is white, who thinks they are working class, should be joining us and be that much mad about the system, because that means that 81 multiples is actually higher than that, because you are included in it, but you ain't got 81 times more money than some of us. So that means there is a huge divide between the haves and the have-nots, and they continuously use race to muddle the waters to get people at each other's throats instead of seeing the commonalities that we all have. So the Ward 5 race is something to be watching. As I said before, Zachary Parker is my favorite for that one. Anyone in DC who was endorsed by the Washington Post, which is owned by Jeff Bezos, by the way. Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post. He owns Whole Foods, in addition to his delivery service that you now know as Amazon. But anyone that's endorsed by the Washington Post, we generally frown upon, and the leading contender in Ward 5 has been endorsed by the Washington Post, so we don't rubber stamp any status quo candidates. The other race I think is important is Attorney General, the top cop in the city, and my favorite for that one is Ryan Jones, but he's the underdog. He's talking about, again, flipping tables and clearing out house in the judicial system. I do never call it the justice system. There's no justice there, but only justice. Richard Pryor would say when he went to prison, the only justice he saw was just us. But the Attorney General race is interesting because Kenya McDuffie, who was the outgoing council member for Ward 5, had announced his candidacy as Attorney General months ago and was the leading candidate, was the favorite to win. He had introduced, not saying I stand behind his entire voting record, but one of the things that I do stand behind is that he introduced the concept of racial equity. He felt that racial equity should be applied, the lens of racial equity should be applied to every budget item. And for those who are not unfamiliar with what equity will look like, I always like this picture. It's the three kids at a baseball game. So they don't have money to get in the baseball game, so they all stand on a box trying to look over a fence to watch the baseball game. So equality is giving each one of those three kids a box to stand on, right? Equity would be acknowledging that, wait a minute, the tallest kid, he already can see over the fence. He doesn't need a box. And the shortest kid, he doesn't need one box, he needs two. So why are you giving a box to the tall kid when the short kid needs two? That's equity. Now all three kids can see the game. That's what equity looks like. So we need to provide equity lens to get rid of some of these disparities, these gross disparities that we are dealing with. And until we do that, we are actually preserving the status quo. And I submit that that's part of the reason why they came from him. They investigated or challenged, I should say, a legality written in the books that said that in order to run for Attorney General, you must be a practicing lawyer for the past 5 years. Well, he was a council member. So you can't run for Attorney General if you're a council member. And, the Board of Election ruled against him, but the council could have added clarification on that with an emergency bill, but no one came to his aid, and they left him hanging and twisted in the wind. So now he's out of a job, and we don't know what's going to happen with him next, but I wish him well. Kenya McDuffie and Robert White, I might add, are responsible for the District Opportunity to Purchase Act, that one of the few tools in the toolbox the city has at its disposal to negate displacement of gentrification, and it was very rarely used in 10 years. And WeAct Radio is one of the few institutions, 2 businesses along with WeAct Radio in Anacostia was purchased and was able to save us from being displaced. So I wish them well going forward. And the Attorney General race is going to be something to watch as well. So the races I'm looking at is the AG, Attorney General, Ward 5, because I live there, and of course the mayoral race. And also you have Brianna Nadeau in Ward 1. She's the favorite to win. So I'm sure that's I don't think her challenge is going to upset her. She's a progressive as well. But Ward 3 in Washington, D.C. is the wealthiest ward in the city. And that means if I told you that the average white family has 81 multiples higher income than the average black family, in Ward 3 is higher than that. Okay? We're talking about disparities. And Mary Che, who I think is a racist, by the way, on the council, is outgoing. She's not coming back after 4 terms. And so it's interesting to see who's going to take her place. That's not going to change much thing. I'm just glad to see her go. So in the words of my black culture, we'll say bye, Felicia, to Mary Che, who thinks is a racist. And I'd be remiss to say in closing that the at-large race, again, we have 13 council members. It's 8 wards. We have 8 people representing each one of those wards. Then we have 4 at-large council members that represent the entire city. And then the number 2 spot, making 13, would be the council chair. Well, we have one of those at-large races involved here, and Anita Bonds is the incumbent. I think she's a nice old lady, but just like capitalism, I think she's outlived her usefulness, and she's a rubber stamp for the mayor's office and the Federal City Commission ran by Anthony Williams. So I'm hoping that my good friend Nate Fleming pulls out a win for that one, because this is if Nate Fleming wins, if at large, if Robert White wins for mayor, if Zachary Parker wins for Ward 5, and if I'm trying to think about Ryan Jones wins for Attorney General, there would be a landslide victory for progressive politics in the nation's capital. That's one or two other variables in that, in terms of other candidates who are progressive as well. But these are the ones that I think are going to make it, going to take us too far left, as we.
Yeah, let's manifest it.
Let's manifest it.
One thing too, to this point about Ward 3, there's a guy, and yeah, like we were saying about the Washington Post, I feel like if voters need to decide who to vote for, just open up your Washington Post and do the opposite of whatever they say. It's a good handy guy.
That's a good rubber stamp. That's a good rubber stamp.
Yeah.
Yes.
But Ben Bergman is running in Ward 3, and he is literally an acolyte of Matt Iglesias. So I don't know that there's a good candidate necessarily in Ward 3, but just vote against him. He is like
anytime somebody wants more police, you should disregard them as well, because that means they are tone deaf. More police. I love this analogy. It's like having a grease fire. When you have a grease fire, you can't throw water on a grease fire. It makes it worse, right? So you need to acknowledge it's a different kind of fire. So yes, if you got a lot of violence and crime, it's natural to want to call the police. We understand that. That's a fire, you put water on it. But now we have a grease fire, and it's created by a sense of hopelessness, joblessness, homelessness, poverty, desperation. And if you just decrease poverty, you would decrease the violence. We have a higher literacy rate. which is direct. There's been empirical data confirming the connection between violence, crime, and illiteracy. So we have a different kind of fire, and so we need to fight it differently. And so anyone who's saying more police, bluntly, is throwing water on a grease fire. And then let me throw this out there. I love this. For anyone who's doubting what we're saying, like, oh, this sounds all great, but you can't fight City Hall. This stuff, you're not going to win. You're not going to Look, this is Washington, D.C., y'all. Okay, our mayor got arrested and then was voted back in office. Okay, we have we had a football team that had a racist name, and the owner of the team with a racist name said they would never ever change the name. You could put it in all caps, and of course it was printed in the Washington Post. And what happened? They changed it, and guess what? The current coach stuck his foot in the mouth and called January 6th a dust up, right? Called January 6th a dust up. And now the new stadium that they was about to get in Washington, D.C., the deal has been rescinded. And Maryland doesn't want them, and Virginia doesn't want them. So now they're a homeless football team. So, things can change, man. Things can change.
I mean, maybe the Metropolitan Police Department will, destroy their encampment too, the Washington football team. It's funny that Del Rio, the coach who said that, his point was like, oh, why are we talking about January 6th, the dust up? What about, 2020, all the burnings? He literally said, I don't get why we never talk about that, as if you don't turn on the TV every day and see people, whining about the uprisings of 2 years ago. It's not like a constant thing people are always reacting to. But that actually brings me to a good closing question. The Washington football team, now the Commanders, I have to ask, what do you think of that name? And do you agree with me? And maybe this will change too. Maybe we'll be able to change this once again, do the impossible once again. Do you agree with me that the name of the team should be the Washington Hogs?
Well, I first got to give a footnote that the Washington team was the team of the South, and the Washington team was the last team in the NFL to get a black player, and it took a federal court order to do so. And it's when they got the RFK Stadium, that's the Robert F. Kennedy Stadium. When they took that stadium, then they were forced by the federal government to adhere to having to end the discrimination, because they was taking federal funding and moving into that stadium. I just want to throw that out there. That's the history. When you hear "Hail the Redskins," it was actually an old Dixie song, and that's the history. So to have the racist moniker change was finally a good thing, but it wasn't that they did it on their own. They was forced to do so. And to answer your question, the current name of Commanders is just more allegiance to the military industrial complex. So yes, I'm not a fan of supporting any of that. And if I had to choose between the two, of course I would go with the Hawks.
Yes.
He said if you had to choose between the two. Big qualifier.
Yeah, because I think that's the Atlanta Hawks, but it's basketball, I believe. But I don't think it's credibly.
Oh, no, I mean Hogs. H-O-G.
H-O-G.
Oh, Hogs. Well, I don't eat pork, and I think that it'd be a fitting name for them, because that's what their defensive line was called when they was winning Super Bowls.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
And I'm still mad at them for what they for how they treated Doug Williams. So I never rooted for them since 1984.
Great man, Doug Williams.
But yeah, their defensive line was called the Hogs when they was winning Super Bowls, though.
Right. Yeah, or I think it was offensive, protecting Williams in that Super Bowl.
Excuse me.
Yeah,
Sorry.
they won in tandem. Yeah.
They won in tandem. Yeah.
But as we're closing out here, where can people find your work in WeAct Radio?
Kymone Freeman, Angry Black Man Therapy. It's Kymone Freeman on all your relevant social media. You can find us on IG and Twitter and Facebook. WeAct Radio. That's WEACT Radio. Our brick and mortar studio is in Anacostia, and we open our doors and our performance venue for anyone that needs it. I'm very proud to say that we just hosted the first welcoming home party for political prisoner Sundiata Accola. For those who are unfamiliar with Sundiata Accola, you may be familiar with Ashada Shakur. Sundiata Accola was arrested with Ashada Shakur, who was broken out of prison and smuggled to Cuba, where she's been enjoying political asylum now. She has the highest bounty on her head of any black woman in the world. And she's been chilling in Cuba since the 80s. And she's probably safer than Jeff Bezos. But he because he was arrested with her, I think they basically exerted their will on him and held him to 49 years in prison, even though he was eligible for parole over 20 years ago. So he was released from prison last month, and 2 weeks ago we had a welcoming home party for him at WeAct Radio, and it was a big honor for us to do so. And I say that to say this is that in the nation's capital, we are independent space, we are a revolutionary space, and we have perfected disruption as a business model. And everyone that comes to DC to march, protest, and be heard, unless they are a Proud Boys or a right winger, they're welcome at WeAct Radio. And we're here to support anyone's endeavors to change the status quo in this country. Progressive media is much needed, and the work you guys are doing is a great contribution to that. As I said before, there's 1 hour of progressive talk in this country for every 10 hours of right wing. And so we need to go about the business of educating people and also battling the apathetic folks who are knee deep in entertainment. And so we just need to make the revolution sexy. And I look forward to engaging with you guys in the future.
Thank you so much, and thank you for coming on. For our listeners, check out WeAct Radio. If you are in, do you mind just muting real quick? Because I'm hearing the echo.
Let me say one more thing. I'm sorry. One last quote. We're all familiar with Martin Luther King's last speech, or at least we should be. But most people are not as familiar with Martin Luther King's next to his last speech. I say that because WeAct Radio is broadcasting live on the radical side of Martin Luther King Avenue. His next to his last speech was called Remaining Awake During a Great Revolution. He goes on to say in that speech that far too often people find themselves living in periods of great social change, yet they fail to develop the new ideas, the new mental responses that the new situation demands. They end up sleeping through a revolution. And I submit to you that that is the quintessential definition of stay woke. So stay safe, stay strong, stay woke.
That's right. Sip that coffee. Well, Kymone, thank you so much for joining us.
Love it. Yeah, thank you so much, man. That was excellent.
I'm sorry to keep you guys waiting, and feel free to edit that because I know I'm a little long-winded. I haven't had.
Oh no, that's better than the other way around.
Yeah, no, I mean that's great for us for content, and also, I didn't talk much because I was like, holy shit, this guy's spitting some fucking knowledge, man. I sat my ass down and listened to this podcast. That was excellent. I can tell you're a broadcaster. That makes sense.
All right. Well, I look forward to seeing you guys in the future, man. Stay safe, stay strong.
Yeah, you too.
Peace.
And
hold on. Sorry, I paused for a second.
Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Is this still recording? Okay.
Now I'm recording. Fuck.
Well, it's Kymone. And if you are in New York City, you can come out to Paid Protest. We are doing another fundraiser comedy show June 17th for the NYC DSA electoral slate. Going to be a ton of funny comics on that. And then, yes, if you are in Washington, D.C., we've just been talking about the stakes of this race, and we really need volunteers. I keep saying we, and it's tugging at my heartstrings that I had to move before this most important election of our lifetimes yet again. But Zachary Parker, as we've been talking about, Ward 5, it's going to be a tight race. He has a shot, so please come out to volunteer. We'll put a link in the description for that, and you can donate to him as well.
Yeah, don't worry. You can just wait until the next most important election of our lifetimes, which will be the next one. But I do feel your pain, man. I'm going to be on that fundraiser show,
Yes.
Paid Protest. So if you want to see me do stand-up, come see that. Listen to my other show, Why You Mad. And that's it. That's all I got to plug. And Alex is also follow Alex.
At Patek Jones.
That's right. Cool. All right, I think we're good. Sorry that the audio was insane. My cat started purring into the microphone at one point, jumped up on my lap, and I had to cut the fucking mic off because it was just like because he wanted a podcast. So
Right. We've been looking for another fourth mic for a while. So.
Yeah, it's Murray. All right. Thank you. It's finished, and have a great weekend, y'all.
It's finished.